Okay, so this is being webcast, so welcome to people in Australia. We have a few changes in our panel. We welcome Karen, who comes as a replacement for June Player, Karen Walker. And we have lost Jess David, who has gone to corporate to learn about the wisdom that is in corporate. So she's a sad loss, and we have a vacancy at the moment. So if you know anybody who fancies joining us, well, that would be wonderful. Okay, so item 2 is the emergency evacuation procedure. So
when the continuous alarm bell sounds, you must evacuate the building by one of the designated exits and proceed to the named assembly point. Designated exits are signposted. Arrangements are in place for the safe evacuation of disabled people.
Thank you, Michaela. We now move on to apologies for absence and substitutions. I think we're all here, which I congratulate you on your attendance and the ability you have for getting through all the annoying roadworks that we have in Cantcham at the moment. So thank you for that. And sadly, though, we do have apologies from both Councillor Matt McComb and Paul Roper, who are the the cabinet members responsible for the items later in the agenda. So unusually, we do not have any cabinet members with us today. As I said earlier, we will have 3 next time to make up for it. So we move on to item 4, which is declarations of interest. Does anyone have any particular declarations on the items on the agenda?
Mentioned in item 11, so I run the community library in Peasdown.
Well done for that. That's a good thing to do. Thank you. I think we will take that. I don't think it will restrict your performance. I just carry on as you would normally. In fact, I suppose I ought to tell you that I am a trustee of the Cantcham Music Festival, which is mentioned in the same report. So, and yes, and so is Alex. Yes. Okay. Anything from anybody else? Okay. So we move on to urgent business agreed by the chair. There is no urgent business agreed or not agreed by the chair. And item 6, public and council statements. We have unusually no public or council statements. So that's we're only going for about 3 minutes, and we're already on item 7. So I know I'm not going to say any more, because if I do, it'll all go wrong. So I'm going to leave that and move on to item 7. Now we have 2 sets of minutes, which I assume we have to approve. So we have a set of minutes for the 13th of March. Does anyone have any matters arising from those minutes? Okay. Would somebody like to propose them? Don't all rush. Thank you. Thank you, Grant. Would somebody like to second them? Alex? Right. Those in favour of accepting those minutes as a true record, please raise your hands. Those for, those against, those abstaining. Okay, lovely. And then we move on to the 27th of March. So are there any matters arising from these minutes? I'm assuming that's not an item on the action up. Excellent. Okay, is there anyone who would like to propose? Oh, thank you, John. Anyone like to second? Thank you, Saskia. Those in favour of agreeing those minutes as a true record, please raise your hand. Those against? Those abstaining? Okay, thank you very much. Those are both passed, with 2 abstentions each time. Item 8 is the Cabinet Member update. As I've already said, we don't have any Cabinet members with us today, so by definition, it's unlikely that we're going to get an update. So we move on wonderfully early, so we can have a real good go at these 2 items, to Don't worry, we're very gentle. So the homelessness update. So I believe that's Graham and Anne, and I assume that Graham Solburn and Anne Robbins are you two. So welcome, it's lovely to see you, and I'll pass over to you for your presentation. We're estimating about 45 minutes for this, so if you could keep it present, make the assumption that we've read the documents. Always a good assumption to make. May not be true, but it's a good assumption to make. Thank you.
Well, thank you for inviting us this morning, and yes, I was going to make the assumption you'd read the papers. I'm not proposing to go into it line by line, because, again, I know you've read the papers. What we were going to do is just kind of introduce some kind of highlights of the report, or some things which we think might be useful to draw your attention to. So, but before I do that, for those of you who don't know, my name is Graham Sayborn, and I'm Head of Housing. And this is my colleague Anne Robbins, who is our Homelessness Response Manager.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a new title.
It's a new title.
But we're getting used to, so yeah.
Getting used to it, thanks. So I suppose the first thing to kind of say really is that homelessness is a fairly broad term. Yeah. And it's not quite as self-explanatory as it first appears. So homelessness includes anybody who is at risk of homelessness. It also includes people who are actually homeless. It includes people who we have a statutory duty to provide temporary accommodation for, which is not all homeless people. We have a statutory duty to provide temporary accommodation for some, particularly those who are more vulnerable, may have dependents and other things, and are not intentionally homeless. And then it also includes rough sleepers, which is the kind of sharp end of homelessness, which often is what people associate with homelessness when we talk about homelessness. Rough sleepers, ironically, may not be homeless, actually. So they may be homeless for a number of reasons. It may be that they are actually homeless. It may be that actually they do have a home, but are not living in it at that particular point. Could be for a whole raft of reasons. So when we talk about homelessness, we are talking about that very broad group of individuals. The report is kind of split that into two roughly. So we talk about what we refer to as statutory homeless. So those are the households which we have an obligation to provide some services or statutory services. And then we'll talk about rough sleepers. And we're roughly going to split the report. Myself, I'm going to kind of introduce the first bits, and Anne's going to introduce the bits around rough sleepers and the subsequent sections. So I suppose overall, what to make of the report really? Well, I guess it's a mixed bag, is how I'd see it. So looking at the overall numbers, presentations, so people coming to us for requesting service, has remained flat on the previous year, which is good news. So the previous year numbers had gone up, so we were slightly nervous that numbers may continue to have gone up. They didn't. They stayed relatively flat, so that is positive news. Also, we were able to turn a higher proportion of the people who came to us into what we refer to as advice and assistance cases. But effectively, that means we were able to provide a higher proportion with a positive outcome, which meant less people ended up going into temporary accommodation. So that's two bits of good news. Presentations roughly flat, and we were able to support a greater proportion of those people who came to us. That is not the national picture. That has to be said. Now moving on to those kind of not so good bits. What we have, and you'll see it in the table, is that the numbers of people in temporary accommodation have increased, and they've continued to slowly increase. Now, if I was you, I'd probably be asking, well, if presentations have remained relatively flat, and actually you're having better outcomes with those people, why are numbers continuing to rise in temporary accommodation? And the answer to that is about throughput. So the people we're now finding in our temporary accommodation schemes are more challenging to move on. So effectively they stay in temporary accommodation for longer. So effectively what you'd commonly call a kind of blockage in the system. So that's why, whilst we have a kind of positive story up front, the number of people in temporary accommodation has continued to increase marginally. So that's a kind of something to be aware of. And in particular, as I mentioned in the report, it's about singles. So it's not that we have more families. Families have remained relatively static, and that is because we can move typically we move families through the system easier. People who come to us as singles have other issues typically, which is why we're, as a local authority, have an obligation to help them. So they tend to be more challenging to move on. So that's why that number has gone up. What I would say though, and this is the real positive part of the picture, is if you look at the graph on 3.11, the bottom line shows our rate of households in temporary accommodation. So that's the proportion of people we have in temporary accommodation per 1,000 households. If you look at the second line up, that's the average in South West, and if you look at the top line, that's the average across England. So the number of people we have in temporary accommodation, whilst it's relatively high by our standards, and unfortunately has been going slowly up, it is very low compared to national standards. So that's the kind of one of the good bits of news. In relation to how many people today, so for example, we have 5 households in bed and breakfast, and they're all singles. So as we speak today, there are no families in bed and breakfast, 5 singles. The majority of our people in temporary accommodation are even in our own schemes or in schemes which we commission. Which neatly leads me on to the kind of next and probably last point I wanted to make really, is that since we're last here, because we do tend to provide an update for the panel normally annually, but sometimes it slips a bit, we have brought on stream a number of our own schemes. So as you'll know, as you'll be aware, we've set up Baines Homes. So we as a council are now a registered provider. We're also registered with Homes England. And we've also established our own supported housing schemes, including temporary accommodation schemes. So as of the moment, we have around 16 units of our own temporary accommodation. Why did we do that? Well, we did that because we could see that numbers and demand for temporary accommodation was increasing. We could see that happening a couple of years ago. So we wanted to try and provide a solution. We think that we're providing a much better solution for those people residing in our own properties, our own temporary accommodation schemes, than the alternative, which is likely to have been bed and breakfast or some other suboptimal accommodation. But it also has the wider corporate benefits that it is much less expensive for us to operate those schemes. And that is a significant contribution of what you'll see in that table. So the table in 3.12, you will see a fairly varying trend line of our net spend on temporary accommodation increasing fairly dramatically between 2019 and 2020 up to the previous full year 2023-24. That is not an unusual picture, and I'm sure you've all read the coverage of a number of local authorities which are on the verge or even have declared bankruptcy, citing temporary accommodation costs as the number one reason for that. By bringing our own schemes online, we've been able to actually reduce our costs, which is why we've actually halved the amount of money we spent on temporary accommodation last year, despite the fact, as I've already said, we've had more people in temporary accommodation. And the reason we can do that is because when we have a number of people in temporary accommodation, we have to put them in bed and breakfast. Bed and breakfast is incredibly expensive. So we're a tourist city, as we all know, so bed and breakfast is at tourist rates. So that's typically around £120 a night for a single room. If you have a family, you may have more in one room. And we can only claim a very small proportion of that back from central government, normally around £20-something a night, which means that we as a local authority are having to subsidise that difference between what we're paying out and what we're getting back. And that's that column about net spend. So again, kind of a mixed bag. Really good news in presentations, really good news around the kind of successful outcomes, slightly less good news around people in temporary accommodation going up, but good news around the spend and what we're doing, the mitigation around it. And with that, I think I'll just hand over to Anne to talk about the other points in the paper.
Okay, so just to preface what I'm going to say about rough sleeping with a bit of extra information, we find that rough sleeping quite often gets conflated with other issues around how people are on the streets, how people gather on the streets, and keen to make sure that people understand that when we talk about rough sleeping, we're talking about quite a small part of what you see in that daily activity. Sometimes quite antisocial behaviour going on the streets, congregations and drinking and other activities. We've recently done a street audit and we're preparing the data to go out, but that street audit went out and spoke to everybody on the street, and we found that about a third of the people found on the street were rough sleeping. As I say, we're preparing that data to make it more easily digestible and make sure it's giving the right information. Well, that will be coming out in the next couple of weeks, and we'll give a bit more detail on how that picture emerges on the street. So rough sleeping is the very visible bit of the homelessness story, really. It's the bit that people tend to assume we're talking about when we talk about homelessness, when actually homelessness is as Graham said, is a very broad area. We are looking at our last autumn count. So every November we go out and do a 4 a.m. count. We go out with our outreach teams and we go and looking for people. We know what the hotspots are. We go looking for people who are rough sleeping. There's been a steady decline over the years. We're now looking at 11 people found last November, which is the lowest we've had in several years. It's just important to state that that is a snapshot, and that figure it can change by day, and it can go up, it can go down. I think the other important thing to say is that we've got excellent relationships with our outreach teams that are provided by DHI and Julian House. We work in very close contact with them on a daily basis, and I think we can say hand on heart that most days we will know the names and histories of the people that we know are rough sleeping, and we have a plan at some point, at some stage, for every one of them. I think the other positive to take away from what appears to be quite a intractable problem is that even regionally, Graham's already said that our performance set against the national and the regional across the homelessness spectrum is good. I think that's also reflected in our rough sleeping figures. And the report sets out there our neighbouring authorities. Where you see the very low numbers, I would point out that those are South Gloss and North Somerset, where anybody needing a service is going to gravitate to one of the bigger cities like Bristol or Bath. So they don't have one rough sleeper. Their rough sleepers have not stayed local. I would say that's probably the story there. But we are our performance on that is pretty good. You can see from the figures there that we've got relatively low numbers compared to our neighbours. You know Manvers Street Hostel. The figures coming out of there show that about 65% of the people using that hostel have a strong connection to the Baines area. They're local people that have found difficulty in their housing and other elements of their life that led them to need Manvers Street Hostel. It's a service that's under a great deal of pressure, and I've worked with them for many years, and it wasn't always the case that Manvers Street Hostel was full. It's always full these days. So it is a real proper local resource for our local people. So moving on from rough sleeping to update you on a piece of work that's been going on for quite a while now. It's quite a long and detailed piece of work. We wanted to look at how the services working across homelessness in Baines are actually delivering. So how people enter what we're calling the homelessness pathway, how they enter it, why they enter it, what their experience is during that, the effectiveness of those services, and how they successfully exit. If they don't successfully exit, why and how can we alter that? So you can imagine there's an awful lot of data, there's an awful lot of analysis going on around that. We're coming to the end of it now, so we're starting to see some themes emerging. Just to say, it's been a piece of work that we did in very close collaboration with our partners. So, as I've already mentioned, Julian House, DHI, Home Group, AWP Mental Health Services, a whole range of providers of supported accommodation and floating support services. So, as a group, the main findings we're coming to are set out there in the report. Broadly, the theme is that we've got really good services, we've got a good pathway. Some tweaks are needed, some alterations are needed, because we are finding there is a bit of a logjam. We need to find ways of developing what's called a rapid rehousing route, because supply is an issue. Affordable housing is under a great deal of pressure from all angles, really. Once you hit that homelessness pathway, that's where you'll really sharply feel the impact of that. And we need to loosen things up in that pathway in order to get people moved through and get working more efficiently. We've got some examples of a rapid rehousing model from other areas in the country, and we're starting to look at how panel working, so sitting down on a regular basis and going, okay, who's in our projects that we can quickly move on, let's work together to make that happen and get people out of the system as quickly as they can. And one of the other key themes that came out of that is that young people services are actually quite specialist. The reasons young people end up homeless are quite different to why a 30, 40, 50-year-old might end up homeless, or a family indeed. So we're going to start looking at that as a separate piece of work. And when we've completed that, that will then go on to form our commissioning intentions for our housing support services. Which brings me nicely on to the housing support contracts. Now, you might remember that with the HCRG contract, there were a load of subcontracts that dealt with housing support services. So we have now brought those contracts back in-house and are in the process of, in fact, we have just got all the contracts back. Everybody's now back in contract with the council. And we're starting to look at, in light of the pathway, what do we want to do about recommissioning that pathway, possibly via these services, but it's very likely to be quite a large open tendering process, quite a big piece of procurement to make sure that what was found by the pathway is expressed in our commissioning intentions and that we start to meet those needs. So one of the biggest services that we work with, one of the most impactful services that we work with, referring back to rough sleeping, is Manvers Street, the hostel on Manvers Street, which is operated by Julian House. Now, you may be aware that they have been served notice on the building they're in, and we are working very closely with them as a team. We've got a project team that works with them on a regular basis to try to find a way forward for that. It's recognised as a key service, and we want to support them in every way we can. So that's ongoing, and is quite an urgent piece of work. And the last thing from me is about partnership working with children and families. So some work went on between the housing services teams and internal colleagues and some outside providers, and that has resulted in Great Hayes Court, which used to be called Argyle Works.
Argyle Works,
yep. We've now got 3 of the 8 homes there are going to be for care experienced young people, because that has been a corporate priority and has been a great success. And I think they are all, if they're not full, they're nearly full. I think that's what we're getting at. Yeah.
So we just put this on the bottom of the report because I think it's useful, just helps tie in the corporate work in which we're undertaking. So used to be called Argyle Works, opposite Costa Coffee on the Lower Bristol Road. If you're aware, they've been building for the last year on there. That is our Baines Homes development. What we try to do is we try to add value with our developments in a way which a typical RP wouldn't necessarily do. And the way we add value on this particular site is that 3 of those units will be prioritised, probably for care leavers, certainly for nominees from the Children and Family Service, but they're highly likely to be care experienced individuals. And it's just another way we can demonstrate kind of adding corporate value to the services. And that concludes us, hopefully with enough time, just over 15 minutes, to answer any questions if indeed you have any, Chair.
Thank you very much. 18 minutes, very good. So what we normally do is we'll go around, because I expect most people have got something to say, and we'll ask them each a question. We'll carry on doing that until we get to our time limit. So should we start? Put your hand there. Yeah, John, you got one? Fine.
Yes, I have a number. Thank you very much, but one at a time. The report talks in many places about providing support. It uses the word support for, supported accommodation, shelter and support as a condition of occupation. What do you mean by support in those contexts?
In those contexts, we have two main ways of delivering support. Either you move into a building, let's say Ratfield House down on Low Bristol Road, and one of the conditions of occupation is that you engage with the support worker there. The support worker will devise a plan for you to address your move on and any other needs you have, so making sure you have the medical attention, any medical attention you need, any mental health support you need, keeping contact with family and other informal support processes, employment, training, getting people back on the right path so they regain independence. That's the main aim of all the support across all our services, is that people are able to walk away or progress from our service to either reduced dependence on support or no dependence on support. So that will usually be around a personal support plan that has targets set out within it, that has time limits set out within it. And that will usually be around a sort of weekly meeting with your support worker to sit down and go, okay, what did you go to DWP? Have you got your have you signed on properly? Can we get your housing benefit going? All those sorts of things, as well as the softer stuff like faith and community, and as I say, family, retaining family or regaining family connections.
It's important, if I'm just chipping out, it's important to note that it is support related to tenancy and move on. This is not personal care.
Yeah.
Just to be really
very distinct from care. It is purely about housing related outcomes.
Thank you. Thank you for this report, and thank you for the excellent work you're doing. I've got a question on Julian House. So you mentioned that they do excellent work for people experiencing homelessness, and they have experienced cuts from the council, and they also they used to run 23 Grosvenor Place, which has now been, in-house. So this is on top of rising costs, including national insurance, and they're now going to close Julian House Bike Workshop. So my question is, are we as a council supporting Julian House enough so that they can continue to deliver the important services?
Well, you're absolutely right to point out the kind of the issues which our support services are facing. As you know, we have had to tighten our belts, particularly in relation to housing support contracts. We tend to look at support services rather than individuals, if that makes sense. So for us, it's very much about the pathway, and it's about us being really clear, as Anne mentioned before, about what is the pathway, the commission pathway we want to achieve, rather than supporting necessarily individual organisations. So we are very clear that when we start implementing the pathway, we will make sure that we're using our resources as most effectively as we can. We are, however, clearly, for us, it would be a loss if we lost the direct access hostel, and that is a relatively specialist field. There are more people involved than just Julian House, but it is still a relatively small number of organisations who are involved in that type of work. So we are working very closely with Julian House and anyone else who would want to work with us to try and re-provide that.
Thank you. So my question is, so potential homelessness, do we have any numbers how many people go into refuges?
Well, refuges are actually a distinct area aside from the homelessness pathway. So we have a domestic abuse coordinator. We have contracts, again, with Julian House, actually, to provide refuge. Some of that refuge is dispersed in the community and is a partnership with Curo. We do have numbers, I can get them to you, but I don't have them off the top of my head. I came here prepared for homelessness rather than refuge, but I can prepare those for you if you like. Yeah. So you'd like figures on refuge use, refuge access,
Yep.
households, yes?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for the always excellent report that you put together on homelessness. I've just got a couple of questions. Considering the annual housing trajectory is expected to be around minus 2,891 by 2029, 2030, are you anticipating, I suppose this also links into my second question, are you anticipating that this will result in not a spiral of homelessness, but an increase in pressure on people going or falling into the pathway of homelessness as a result of that? And it would have probably been interesting to see how this report can connect to those housing areas in a greater sort of way. I know this report is sort of standalone on homelessness, but it's so key and connected to housing, hence why Graham's here today. And then the other thing which links sort of into that is, is there a way in which, and I know it's an always moving subject, but that we can provide us with an idea for goals and ambitions or where we want to be as a council on the issue of homelessness? So two sort of different questions there.
Thank you, and I'm happy to pick up the first part, and I wonder whether Anne, if you want to pick up the second part. There's so many reasons why people become homeless. I think it's hard to attribute one particular stream and then kind of having a cause effect and saying, well, because of housing trajectories, that's going to cause this. We do articulate it at the beginning of the report. Is one of the things we're finding at the moment is that one of the key drivers of people coming to us is around the cost of living. So those kind of tends to be more those macroeconomic factors which tend to drive homelessness. Plus, when you link it with legislative changes, and again we allude to that at the moment, so the government are moving in a positive direction in relation to the Renters' Rights Bill, but that could create turbulence for us until it's fully implemented. So you do have those kind of shocks which then transfer into individuals coming up to us on the door. However, that said, generally speaking, the trajectory is a positive measure. As you know, when we have huge demand for affordable housing within the district at the moment, and getting our affordable housing delivered on private sector development sites can be challenging, particularly viability. If you have more developments, well, clearly that kind of gives you a larger field to get your affordable housing quota from. So in actual fact, it may be a positive measure. But I would, again, because of the fact that it's often macroeconomic factors and there's so many individual things at play, it's hard to kind of draw one conclusion and say this is going to be positive or negative. So it's probably not as specific as you wanted.
So your second bit was about goals and ambitions, yeah. So you may be aware that we have our housing plan now in place, and that will express a lot of our ambitions around the future and how we're going to provide for growth, really, in demand. The bit I focus on so far has been Pillar 4 of the housing plan, which is, again, it brings us back to supported housing and accommodation and how we address that growth. And again, that will refer us back to the homelessness pathway and the review and our commissioning intentions, and how we make sure that everything is tailored towards addressing growth and making sure we're really quick to respond to changing need as well. So we're able to be agile and spot changes in demand, spot changes in support needs.
But in high-level terms, we do have really two clear targets, performance targets. So for me, around, particularly around the statutory homelessness, the absolute acid test to me is people in temporary accommodation. That one indicator sums up a whole raft of performance. How you're dealing with it, it's about how you deal with people coming through the doors, how you stop people before they come in temporary accommodations, how you move people through. It's a really good indicator, I think, number of people in temporary accommodation. So what we have done is, and you'll see it in the corporate reporting, is we've set a movable target which places us in the top third of all performing local authorities. That's what we've done. And we think that's right and appropriate. So what that does is it tries to separate our performance against some of the macroeconomic factors which kind of, rises all kind of boats, so to speak. So that's the clear performance indicator we have on temporary accommodation. In relation to rough sleepers, well, we're clearly following the government guidance, which is about having 0 rough sleepers. And that is our absolute ambition. Now, we can all kind of wonder whether that's achievable or not, but that is absolutely our ambition.
And I think it's important to say as well that we are going to have to be guided by the government's own homelessness and rough sleeping strategy, which we are told is due any day now, which is, I think has been due any day now for at least 8 months. But when that comes out, that will set some of the framework for us on how we move forward on homelessness and rough sleeping particularly. That will then enable us to mould what we're doing around, particularly around the grant, that was a significant grant that we get from central government to address rough sleeping and homelessness. So yeah, there are some bigger national issues that need to be resolved before we can really set the high level stuff. But there's a lot of work going on at a local level to make sure that we're prepared and are getting the best results out of what we've got at the moment.
And just talking about, going forward in performance, just one of the factors I didn't mention, I should have really, is that, yes, we do get significant funding from government for this work. Now, the government are reviewing the formula for how they calculate our grant, which is called the HPG for short, Homelessness Prevention Grant. It's currently in consultation, but if that goes through, our grant will go down by around a quarter. So again, we're talking about quite chunky sums of money there, and again, clearly those things can have an impact on our performance. So there's a whole raft of things at play here.
Thank you. Some interesting news that I didn't know in that, so thank you very much. I'm going to save my questions to later on if there's time. Most of them you've already answered in your presentation, so well done for that, and thank you very much for your presentation, which I thought was short, and the report itself was very, very clear and precise, so thank you for that. So I'll move on to Alex. Have you got any questions, Alex? Deborah?
Yes, I do, Chair. I'd like just to start by saying thank you so much, and not just for the quality of the report, but the work that you do that puts us in such a good position with all the challenges that we've got by comparison with neighbours and England as a whole. I mean, I have worked with Graham and Anne, and I mean, the dedication and hard work of your team is absolutely fantastic. So my question, though, is about, if you could talk a little bit more about the challenge. I know it's very much the tip of the iceberg, the visible tip of the iceberg with rough sleepers, about the challenges your team has in those people who really don't want to move off the streets and how you deal with that, because I think that's one of the biggest challenges in getting to zero. I'm conscious that there's a lady living in a tent very close to where I live in close to the centre of Bath. The outreach team have spoken to her. She's not very keen to move on. The people who own the land aren't keen to move her on. People locally worry about her health, and there's a lot of compassion, I think, that people want to see. People helped off the streets, but I get the sense that sometimes the challenges that those people have are so deep that they find it even hard to engage with the outreach teams. So perhaps you could talk a little bit about that.
Or that are rotating through and coming back frequently. So we have a number of ways of working to try to address their needs. For many years now, we've had what's called a task and targeting group, where specialist workers and ourselves get in a room and go, okay, this person is making nil progress, what can we do? Or is hitting a barrier, or is on a bit of a merry-go-round of waiting lists, what can we do to address that? And trying to find ways of working more creatively and across work streams. That can be successful. Sometimes not so much. I think probably we would all have somebody in our mind of who that might be. That said, we've reduced our number from, I think it was 15, and we've gone down to 13 now. So we are looking at a slightly smaller group there, but they are very often the same group of people. So we are having to find more creative ways, and you may have heard of Housing First as a principle. So Housing First is an internationally recognised system where, instead of insisting people are at a place in their life where they can give up drink, drugs, antisocial behaviour, or, a whole raft of things that prevent them accessing perhaps more traditional routes, we say all you've got to do is hold your tenancy. As long as you're able to hold your tenancy, we can support you on a daily basis to just not lose your home, effectively. And the other changes quite often follow. Sometimes they don't. But the idea is that this is a different way of approaching it. It's not you must jump through these hoops to get a home. It's like let's get you in the home, then you can start looking at what needs to change. So there's that. We've got, again, going back to the TPG, the Target Priority Group, we've got a specific group for that. We've got a specific group for people that we find are perhaps not target priority, but they feel a little bit like they're banging their heads against a brick wall in trying to access things. So we've got that. We've got something called the Next Steps Accommodation Panel, which was established to set Grosvenor rolling. So who should be living in Grosvenor Place? That now has kind of grown outwards and upwards and is now a really good panel that works effectively to take cases referred by support workers to say, okay, let's look across the range. What have we got? What are those persons' needs? What have we got in place? What can we wrap around them in a place that will make that work for them? And our really good relationships with our providers are a key part of that. And we've got the Homelessness Partnership as well, which works really well across the sector to start to pull together ideas and find new and innovative ways of working. So I think we've got, at the root of it all, are these good, strong relationships, very open and very honest about the limitations of what can be achieved, but with always with the person at the centre, always with how can we find an effective way of addressing this person's needs. So I think we do pretty well on that, to be honest.
Thank you. Anna?
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Really interesting. And just to follow up on that, I work in healthcare with quite a lot of drug takers and smokers. Mm-hmm. And Housing First sounds like a great component. What you do is you engage with them and give them a positive intervention, and then things grow from that, and positive change comes from that.
Right.
So absolutely right. My question, just very briefly, because I'm mindful of the time, was around the young people's services that you were considered separately.
Mm-hmm.
So just currently, is that at the moment part of the whole pathway? And then going forward, the definition, because again, back with my NHS hat on, young people's services can be quite brutal in paediatrics when it just has a stopgap at 18. And I understand that we, with our young people children's services, we have a bit more of a blended attitude on that, and that seems to work well around the care system. So is that something you're going to adopt, or are you going to go with the NHS at 18, the funding just stopped?
No, we haven't, and we wouldn't. I think the point about young people in supported housing, it's as susceptible to those demand issues as the rest of the homelessness pathway, and you would undo so much good work if you said, well, you've hit 23, you've hit 21, whatever, off you go, you're out, because you're back to square one. So we've always had a very flexible attitude. You know, let's work together to get things moved on as quickly as possible, and if we're getting towards the upper age limit, let's work more intensively. But it's never meant you must now go, you are, I don't know, 18 on one day or 25 on one day. So when it comes to the homelessness pathway, the reason we pulled it away from the adult stuff was it was getting increasingly difficult to differentiate the need, because young people's needs are really quite specific. And lumping them in with the adult and families and everybody else, and people with acute drug and alcohol needs, for instance, wasn't helpful. So we're going to be doing a similar exercise, but that looks solely at outcomes for young people. But it would not be the intention to create deadlines and false cliff edges, if you like.
I would like to ask about the disability benefit cuts. So changes have just gone through, basically, and we'll see changes to universal credit and PIP. 150,000 people are expected to be pushed into poverty. How are you preparing for that?
I think it's relatively new news. I don't think we've started to prepare yet at all. It's obviously going to be a big factor, but I think we need to go away and kind of digest what's happened. But yes, we'll obviously have a very keen eye on that.
Thank you. Yes, usage rates. Section 3.11 in the report, you say our usage rates are very much smaller or lower than those in the southwest, which are substantially lower than those in England. What do you attribute our low numbers to?
That's a really interesting question.
I think we've got
a brilliant service.
Yeah, well, I do think that is an element of it. I think we have a prevention first approach. So many other authorities will not be as accessible as ours. So we've got open doors, or we've got phone lines. Some authorities have a sort of call centre approach. Some are really, you must fill in a form and we'll get back to you. You will speak to somebody on the day if you ring our service, and their approach won't be, you must be up against your 56 days. So the law says that if you're in 56 days of a real threat of homelessness, we must act. We don't wait for the expiry of the 56 days. As soon as someone makes contact, we start to work with them in a preventative way that, quite honestly, diverts people from the pathway.
I think I'd also add two other things onto that as well, really. One is that we, as a unitary, we have some benefits, but we're also small enough that we have really good partnerships. So that's with our other colleagues working in children and families or adults, or whether it's with people like Julian House and DHI. So we have that really good partnership working, which helps people through the pathway, helps us establish the pathway correctly in the first place, and then helps people through the pathway. So I think that's one thing. The other thing I would say is also, being honest about these figures. I think, it is really good where we are, and I think the really key one is how we fare compared to the Southwest. I think that's a really valid comparison. The England one is slightly skewed in reality by the large London authorities, who have, huge problems. And funny enough, I was reading an article the other day, and one authority was quoting their rate at 25. So if you if you look at where the graph is on the paper and you put 25, I imagine that's literally at the top of this piece of paper. That shows what they're dealing with. So that's Ensley as a local authority. So those, so you have a few of those, and those do skew the England figure to make it particularly high. That said, I don't think that should undermine the really great work what we're doing, which is particularly demonstrated by where we are relative to the southwest.
But if we are demonstrating best practice in action, why isn't the rest of the country, certainly the rest of the southwest, following our practices, following our standards? Why aren't they doing as well?
Well, perhaps they should be. But again, we do have some benefits, and one of the benefits is because we have, it's much easier to keep on top of relatively small numbers than to try and turn a tanker of large numbers around. So, and one of our neighbouring authorities has around 15 to 1,600 households in temporary accommodation.
Can I stop you there?
Dealing with that is huge.
What you're talking about is conjecture, because you don't, this is not your area, is it? You've moved into the
No, but I do. But that is a fact.
I
wouldn't say
that, but I would
anything
prefer to stick to questions related to the work you do, if you don't mind. So, Grant, do you have any more questions?
It was just around what you said about the reduction in the grant that you get from the government, and I understand it's going to be deprivation based, the new model for receiving the grant. I just wondered what sort of representations Baines is making on that approach, and whether there are any mechanisms that can be put in place for adjustments in that approach, given the different, we live in quite a wealthy, prosperous area, but that doesn't prevent or stop homelessness. So I'm just wondering specifically what representations Baines are making to try and get some adjustment on that grant, so that we don't see I think you said 25% reduction in what we receive.
So, to be clear, that was a consultation exercise, and to help the consultation, they gave examples. Well, they didn't give examples. They said what authorities would receive under the new regime, and we did consult. We gave our views in relation to that consultation, so we did respond to it. We haven't heard anything since, but clearly, there is a group of authorities like us who are, like all things, there's winners and losers, isn't there? And we will use all our kind of options we can to try and get our voice heard. And interestingly enough, I know one of your fellow colleagues is at the LGA conference, and we have primed him as to some of the questions and some of the housing issues which we would like to be kind of raised. I think we also put that on the list.
Because very, very interesting and thoughtful answers and questions. So thank you to the panel and to you two for answering them so well. My question is about looking at the table on page 24, which is the southwest, well, part of the southwest region close to where we are, the sort of, I suppose, the Wecker region, for want of a better word. I noticed that Somerset is really quite high in comparison to the others, with the exception of Bristol. And I just wonder, is one of the reasons why our figures are lower is because we don't actually have any coastline in Baines, whereas somewhere like Weston-super-Mare, which I'm guessing is Somerset, or North, that's North Somerset, good point. Okay, so is there a connection, my question is there a connection between seaside places? Does that get more homelessness and more rough sleeping than those areas that don't?
I think probably, that's quite difficult to answer, but I think they may have some of the same issues we have in terms of tourism and being a popular site for people to gather in.
I suppose I wonder whether we need to be honest, and we don't have the answer to that.
Yeah.
Clearly, we're focused on.
Fair point. Yeah, I was just curious because, despite the fact that Weston-super-Mare is not in Somerset, the Somerset figures I assume are because of the coastline is in Somerset. So, You think Taunton is the hot spot for Somerset, do you?
Possibly.
Anyway,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm saying what I shouldn't be saying, which is wandering onto areas which aren't our power. So I will stop there, and you can see why I didn't ask any questions. Thank you very much for coming. It's very, very helpful. I'm sure we appreciate the amount of work you do. I echo Deborah's comments about the quality of your standard of work with what is a very difficult group of individuals that you have to work with. So thank you very much.
Yeah, it's working now. Okay, so I've got some short slides which I shared with you previously, but I'll run through them now to give you the context, and then I'll make the assumption that the report's been reviewed, and then happy to take questions. So I'm Robert Campbell. I'm Head of Culture and Heritage for the Council. In operating heritage services, I look after the Roman Bath, the Pump Room, the Victoria Art Gallery, the Bath Record Office, and I'm leading the project to build a new fashion museum in the centre of Bath. Also held the cultural brief for the council, so I'm the lead officer on culture and also on tourism. So if you could go through to the next page, and then the one after. Great, thank you. So this presentation's been made available to you digitally, so you can link through to these things. But in terms of where we are now, Bath and North East Somerset has a cultural strategy. It was established in 2011 and covers the period up to 2026. It was reviewed in 2015, and then an update was published. And then in 2015, the administration at the time adopted that cultural and creative strategy review. Unfortunately, the infrastructure required to deliver on that review sort of fell apart between 2015 and then 2019. And then it sort of reached its nadir in 2019 when the Bath and North East Somerset Arts Development Team dissolved. And what that represents is really a sort of public statement from the council at that time that it didn't value culture as much as other local authorities, and we became one of the only local authorities in the country without a team dedicated to delivering arts and culture in its widest sense. However, that was more a public-facing thing. As you'll be aware, the council did carry on delivering cultural activity through heritage services, through our regeneration team, through our libraries, through our involvement in the West of England Music Service, and also through the green infrastructure, now the green transformation team. Unfortunately, if you were an external looking in, you would have assumed that the council was not invested in delivering culture. Fast forward to May 2023, and as you'll know, the current administration were voted in with some strong manifesto commitments to culture. A new economic development and culture portfolio was created with Councillor Paul Roper as the lead councillor for that, and as well as culture also remaining in the leader's portfolio due to his interest in that subject area. And then the Baines corporate strategy was revised in 2023, as you'll know, with cultural life as one of the core priorities of the council. So we went from a place between 2011 and 2023 where culture was very important, and then it became less important, and then the administration now see it as absolutely essential to the business of the council. And then from a corporate point of view, the council recognises that culture is essential to placemaking. It's really important, and that's where that's taken us. Next slide, please. In terms of why is culture important? Well, it will sit under the council's core strategic sort of policies. So why is the council interested in culture? Because it can contribute to the economic strategy, and also to the health and well-being of our residents. And those are the two key outcomes that we're seeking to achieve by bringing in a new cultural development plan. Next slide, please. And then the one after that, thanks. So what is the work that I'm here to talk to you about today? Well, I've been tasked by the administration and the senior officers to develop a cultural development plan for Bath and North East Somerset Council. So that document will lay the groundwork to create a place where culture thrives, supports the local economy and improves the health and well-being of our audiences. The Council will support, facilitate and enable partnership activity and act as a convener. So what we're not saying is we need to do a whole load of additional cultural activity. The Council already does a lot of things, and we need to think about how we deliver that more strategically, but also how we bring together and support the wider cultural sector across Bath and North East Somerset. The strategy covers the period 2025 to 27, and it is a deliberately sort of short period, and there are a couple of reasons for that. One is the changing world that we see around us and the need to be quite fleet of foot. I don't think it's sensible to bring in a cultural strategy or a cultural plan that seeks to go more than 5 years. On average, cultural strategies run around 5 years. So the other reason for limiting it to 2 is because we're in the middle, as you'll know, of an administration sort of electoral cycle. A lot of the money to support the main aims and activities of the administration has already been allocated. So it feels more sensible at this stage to work on some of the immediate priorities, of which there are many, and look to concurrently develop some really strong policy positions so that the incoming administration of whoever that is in 2027, there's a strong basis for them to think about how they can integrate culture into their policy agenda at that point. So over this 2-year period, we will align the council-generated cultural activities with Bain's corporate priorities. We will integrate cultural activity in the existing and future work of the Council, so the current delivery strategies that are under delivery and the strategies that are coming into fruition can have culture embedded amongst them. And then probably most importantly, we'll work with the sector to understand what they need to make culture thrive in this place and then help them to make this happen. Next slide, please. So, we started by thinking about a draft definition for culture. You know, what do we actually mean by that? And what I've done here is taken the Arts Council England definition of culture and then added some things into it which are really relevant to Bath and North East Somerset, which Arts Council don't include in their definition. So I've included in heritage buildings, location filming, festivals specifically, and also large sporting events. And I think for me, when you encounter a large sporting event, especially in Bath, like the Bath Half Marathon or a big rugby day or a big football game, that feels like a cultural activity, and it felt important to recognise that. Including these things in our definition also aligns it with the Visit West Destination Management Plan, which is the marketing plan for the region. And then I'd also make the point that there needs to be a recognition of the contribution of landscape and nature to culture, especially here. We obviously have large rural parts of the community and rural places, and there is a strong cultural tradition that exists there that we should recognise. Bath as a World Heritage Site, one of the outstanding universal values is because of the green setting of the city, and it's also undeniable that people in the market for culture quite often are also in the market for green-like experiences in nature as well. So it feels important to recognise that. Next slide, please. The Council's vision for culture in Baines is to be recognised as a region with a vibrant and inclusive cultural offering that contributes to the health, well-being and economic prosperity of its residents and visitors. So that is the sort of guiding light under which I've ordered the thoughts in the documents that you've seen. You know, the Council and me personally recognise the transformative power of culture to improve the lives of residents, and I don't think we can fully deliver on the Council's agenda and the Council's vision to improve people's lives unless we do that integration of culture into a huge range of the work that we do. Next slide, please. I've ordered the plan under a number of strategic objectives. So what you haven't seen, because I haven't constructed it yet, and that's what I'm doing during this consultative period that we're in now, is the actual action plan. So I've written the development plan, which sets out the sort of framework, but exactly what are we going to do over these next couple of years, I haven't written that yet. But the way that will be structured will be under these headings. So health and wellbeing, place shaping, the creative economy and the visitor economy. And there was more detail in the development plan that expounds on that a bit further. But this will be the framework under which we order our action planning. Next slide, please. As well as those specific actions, there are also some cross-cutting themes which I think are relevant across all of them. So inclusivity, environmental sustainability, financial sustainability, and a commitment to quality, experimentation and creativity, all of which are absolutely fundamental to what we and the sector want to achieve through this plan. Next slide, please. Like I said, we're not starting from zero. The council already does a huge amount of cultural work, and there are also some things that, although the action plan hasn't been written, we know that we're going to be committing to. So the Bath Social Impact Network is a partnership with Bath Spa University that is a non-council owned forum where the sector can come together and hear from us about what we want to achieve, but most importantly, the council can listen to the sector and understand what they want from a cultural plan and how we can support them more. And the council committing to such a network is really important for those external relationships with funders such as Arts Council, WECA and DCMS. We need to be seen and also to commit to that kind of engagement to make this development plan work. The Fashion Museum will run throughout this plan. It is the council's largest investment in culture over the next few years, and it is also one of the largest cultural investments in this country over the next 5 years. So it is absolutely essential that the Fashion Museum embodies every facet of this plan, of which it will. We need to change the way the council approaches culture. If you talk to the colleagues in the cultural sector, you will hear that sometimes they find it difficult to engage with the council and they find it difficult to put on cultural events. That's not because any officer or policy is remiss in this regard. It's just that we can work more closely with the sector to help them get where they want to be. And the cultural activity that you see is often from people who've managed to work through the bureaucratic system that we have in place to deliver those outcomes. And we just want to make it easier for that to happen, whilst at the same time discharging the council's responsibility for safety, security and the other responsibilities we hold. The attainment gap, as I'm sure you know, is a large issue for this council. We have a noticeably sort of awful attainment gap in Bath and North East Somerset. Culture, in my view, and also the view of the colleagues who have come together to look at the attainment gap, is absolutely essential in addressing that and giving people who are struggling access to that cultural capital will definitely help in closing that attainment gap. And this strategy will focus hard on how we can use culture, both council generated and sector generated, to improve that issue. Next slide, please. Like I said, we're already delivering quite a lot of cultural activity, most notably through regeneration and green infrastructure programs, and that will continue. The strategy is not here, or the development plan is not here to stymie the work of colleagues who've already built links in community and delivered some really fantastic outcomes in places like Keynsham, Radstock, Midsummer Norton, and across the district as a whole, and that will continue. It will bring that work into a framework so that we as a council can talk more holistically about the cultural work we do and talk, authoritatively about the amount of effort we put into culture, where it's happening, why it's happening and what it's doing. There is a nascent strategy to look at the creative workspace in Bath and North East Somerset. When you consult with the sector, one of their main calls is for more creative workspace. That is absolutely essential. It is under pressure from more traditional economic space, industrial space, and also housing. And we need to work with colleagues across the council to try and balance that triumvirate. So, yes, we need housing, yes, we need economic space. We also need creative workspaces and also performance spaces of different sizes, of different requirements if we want culture to thrive here. So we need to work with colleagues to balance those priorities. And then it is really important to work with the West of England Mayoral Combined Authority. They have a strong commitment to culture, they have a cultural plan, I sit on their cultural compact, and they are one of the main ways to validate the activity we do to external funders and also bring funding in from central government and other arm's length funding bodies into Bath and North East Somerset. So continuing to build a strong relationship with them over the next couple of years will be really, really important. Next slide, please. So the final slide, just saying what I'm doing right now. I'm sharing the draft cultural development plan with colleagues across the council. I'm here today with you to get your feedback and help me shape that as a policy development opportunity. And I'm also out in the sector right now meeting a huge range of different cultural organisations, town council representatives and others to get their views. And the plan you see in front of you is a draft, and I'm not precious about the draft. I think it is accurate and relevant, and I think it's a good piece of work for the reasons outlined. But I need to shape it with the sector, and it can't just be about what the council thinks. We need to understand what the sector need from us over this time. I'm trying to get feedback in from everyone by the end of July. I will then spend August redrafting that plan as required and creating the action plan under the strategic priorities and across the enabling pillars, as I've discussed, and then look to try and bring it forward for formal adoption by the council over this autumn. I'd also like to point out that there is a Citizens' Assembly for Culture, which is being run by the West of England Combined Authority, funded part by them, part by Arts Council and part by external funders, and that will be an opportunity to put the cultural plan in front of a democratically selected group of residents from Bath and North East Somerset, but also from the other authorities across the Wecker region. And although that that won't be a wide-ranging conversation with residents, it will be very focused and I think really valid engagement with residents on what we're trying to achieve here. So that's the slides. Happy to take questions on anything you'd like to discuss.
Thank you, Rob. A minute less than the other group, so well done, 17 minutes. We'll go this way around. So, Anna, do you have any questions?
That's very kind, thank you, Chair. Yeah, and thank you for your report. So I understand it's a draft cultural development plan, and I know I get a bit of a reputation around here for being the ward representation for the Tree Valley, which is very rural. And it was really interesting that you've obviously added to the Arts Council definition and included big sporting events. So in my head, I'm thinking in Bath, obviously the Bath Half, and I know there's quite a few events there, and obviously the rugby. Yeah. In the Tree Valley, we have an event called the Tree Valley 10K, which sold out and is a charity-run thing. And talking to the organisers of it, a lot of the cost that has spiralled in the last few years is around road closure, and obviously that's expensive, and it reflects in the health and safety aspect of it, and it has to be done right. And my query is, if you're developing this strategy, if events were cultural, local, and perhaps charity, so not around making money, but for the benefit of the community, and they do benefit the community because we involve the school heavily with it, would you be willing to reduce the cost to close the roads? Is that something that you would have the mechanism to do? Because it is a big cost.
Yeah. Just I'm Chew Valley resident as well. I live in Chew Stokes. I know the 10K, and I was talking about consulting with the sector. I had a meeting with Chew Valley Arts last week. So it's not just about the urban centres. The point you raise about fees and charges, I mean, the easy answer is yes. The council can look at the fees and charges it levies on cultural organisations, but the hard bit is that we're under, as every officer and councillor who comes in front of you will say there's huge budget pressures. So it would need to be a holistic decision in the context of the council's overall budget if fees and charges associated with cultural activity were removed. So the council can choose to do that, but it would add to the savings or income generating that would need to come up somewhere else. But from my point of view, that will be something I will be putting forward, and as part of this, it will be up to the administration essentially to make that decision as part of the budget round. I can't speak for them, but I know that they are definitely minded to consider that. It is not a straight no, but it's difficult times. So how do we do that? I think there's also a question around equity and what is the transparent system for how fees and charges are waived. And it as with all these things, you want to make it as easy as possible, but to make it as transparent and as equitable as possible, there's probably a certain amount of administrative burden on there which we'd need to work through as well, and I don't have the mechanism for that worked out, but we know it's an issue and it will come up many times, and we know that some cultural organisations are choosing not to do work because of the cost, be it council imposed cost or the other costs they encounter from a wider cost of living. So we have that in our gift. Can we do it or not is a bit of a more detailed conversation, but I will be bringing it up as part of this.
Can I have your indulgence, since Rob is asking for feedback, to have more of a comment than a question? So I think there's a lot that's really good in here, but there are some opportunities that I'm not seeing, which maybe are just because you're not expressing them, but particularly around trying to get things focused into the wider areas of Baines, because Bath does tend to suck a lot of attention because of its UNESCO status, its international status. And in particular, it's fantastic that the visitor economy in Bath generates so much money for us, and that benefits the whole authority because it gets spread effectively around the authority. But I would really like to see some thinking perhaps around the visitor economy as to how we could make we could encourage the attractiveness of what are a lovely part of the world outside the city to visitors, so that our visitor economy isn't solely focused on the city, but is also thinking about not just, there were great attractions around the place, there are lots of festivals around the place. How do we try and pull some of that tourist pound out of the real hotspots and encourage a wider spread? So that's my comment, and kind of linked to that with the creative workspaces. Actually, creative workspaces are a fantastic way to build on the strong areas in the smaller urban centres in particular, and regenerate those and help the high streets in those areas. Is that part of your thinking when you're looking at creative workspaces?
Yes, and I think the point is, although I'm the lead officer for culture, a lot of this work will need to be delivered by colleagues. So it is the regeneration team who have constructed the creative workspace strategy and will lead on that. I'm just sort of bringing it under this umbrella because it speaks to the different things. But yes, it is the plan that we use culture to regenerate areas, and underpinning the creative economy is part of that, and workspaces and performance spaces or venues are essential to that. Again, it's the balance of economy, housing and creative workspace. But I see a real willingness from colleagues in housing. I work with Graham very closely, planning, transport, regeneration. There's no obstruction here from any councillor or colleague across Baines. Everyone leans in, appreciates the importance of culture. There is work to do to integrate it into these different plans and bring it together. And I completely agree on the visitor economy point as well. I think the point I would make is for me, there's the phrase we use in the industry quite often is locally loved, nationally known. And I think the first bit for areas that don't have that inherent tourist pull, like Bath does, is to create a cultural ecology which is absolutely loved by local people. And that in itself starts to bring people out there. And if locals love it and invest in it, that gives it that vibrancy that will bring the tourists out there. For me, the visitor economy side of this and distributing those visitors outside of Bath is not part of this 2-year plan. I think it is a longer term vision that fits into a whole number of areas around transport and investment in culture and a whole load of things. I'm cognizant as well of the housing pressure that the council is under, or the authority is under, and with the restrictions on housing development in Bath imposed by the UNESCO listing, that the houses will most likely be outside of Bath, and that is challenging in a number of ways, but it also provides a ready audience for culture outside of the city over the next few years. And I think, again, that's not a 2-year solution, but starting to integrate culture into our wider plans for place to align with those as those housing allocations come forward is a really important part of what we're doing.
Thank you very much. One of the points you made about North East Somerset and making people proud of the culture of their area. In Cambridge a couple of years ago, because obviously we got the Abbey in the Park, which is something that me and my colleague have been working with Paul Roper on, is we had an exhibition down in Makespace, which was quite successful, I remember. And I think it'd be nice if we'd done stuff like this more often, whether it's in the summer holidays or something, and even Radstock with their mining heritage. I think it's something where, as a council, we could really incentivise communities and really make people proud of that they're not just, don't know how to word it, that they're not just kind of outside Bath, but they're part of the whole strategy and the whole part of the council as well. So that's just a comment I wanted to make. Thank you.
Completely agree. And it was staff members in my team from Heritage Services who were instrumental in creating the exhibition you referenced, because we hold the archaeology from Keynsham Abbey as part of the council's heritage collection. So we are committed to that as a service, and it will be an important part of our service planning going forward. We're always trying to take what we do at our sites in Bath out to communities outside of the city. And I think, yes, that as well as emphasising the sort of inherent differing heritage or specificities of each of the places that we have in the authority, we also recognise that actually a big barrier to culture and engagement at the moment is having to travel to it, be it in Bath or elsewhere. And actually the more brilliant cultural experiences we can have locally, the better. And that will, what we want, a measure of success on this is more cultural engagement. And we will only achieve that if we deliver it locally. And also recognising that the strong cultural ecosystems we have over it. So Keynsham Music Festival this weekend, that is, I think it's, remember the phrase, it's one of Europe's largest free or outdoor music festivals, and that's things to celebrate. And how can the council support those activities? It's almost certainly not by throwing cash at it. We don't have that money. So what else we can do? And that's part of what I'm trying to work through.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for that. You set me up really well. I am a trustee of Keynsham Music Festival, and I have been since 1999. Keynsham Music Festival started in 1997.
Shouldn't you have made it, Craig?
I did.
Oh.
I heard you say it earlier.
But thank you for pointing it out, Anna. I would say over the period of time that I've been working, it's a charity, by the way, the Music Festival. The relationship with Baines has not been positive, and it's got worse, as you'll policy very clearly stated at the beginning of your presentation, where things turned. And Anna's point about costs to local festival cultural events by Baines is sometimes hard for the trustees to take. But I'm pleased to say that there has been a little bit of a renaissance in the last, well, basically this year. So I'm not here to cause trouble and to be critical. I'm here to embrace the idea of culture moving further away from the cultural centres. We're very proud of the Country Music Festival. It actually started on Tuesday and it goes on until Sunday, so we're at the very beginning. If you leave and you look at the Memorial Park now, you will see very large marquees being erected. There are 5 very large marquees. There are 4 stages in the weekend events, but we do cover many cultural events. For example, we have the Magic Flute, the opera tonight, and there are many other community activities. It's a community festival. Yes, in your papers you claim it's the biggest free music festival in Europe. Thank you for that. Not quite sure how you got those figures, but I'm not going to argue with you.
It must have been in some bump fibres.
But we would love to work more closely with you. Like most festivals, we find it incredibly difficult, and it's become more difficult to raise the funding. It costs about $150,000 to put the Country Music Festival on every year. We know that a lot of other festivals have fallen by the wayside, like St Paul's is only every 2 years now, and we are really up against it financially. You made the point that Baines won't be helping financially, but the idea of reducing fees for, we have to Baines charges us for using the park, which we find a bit annoying because it's our park, we pay for it with our council tax, so it seems rather harsh that we have to pay twice to use it, and things like that. If you could smooth those sort of problems out, that would be really helpful. And if we could use some of your expertise in certain areas, that would also be very, very helpful. I welcome the whole idea of a cultural strategy, and look forward to having a better positive relationship with the authority.
Yeah.
To be fair.
Just to reassure you, I've reached out to Country Music Festival. I've had 2 or 3 meetings with Mike May, and I've got another more formal consultation with him next week to go through, or next week, the week after, to go through the plan. And he's invited me down to the festival this weekend, so I'm hoping to attend that as well. So we're really keen. Again, like the fees and charges, that is potentially something the council can look at, but like I said, it's got to be in the context of our overall budget, and those are the tough decisions that the council will have to, the administration will have to make as an overall. So we hear the issue very loud and clear from across the board, from nearly every cultural organisation who's delivering large-scale public events. So if we can't do that, we've got to think about what other things we can do to help.
Well, I'm pleased that you've met Mike. Mike is a bit of a legend, I have to say. He's done an amazing job. He's the guy that raises lots of sponsorship via his business connections, and this is where the crux of our problem is, really, because the economy at the moment, the local economy, doesn't seem to have a lot of spare cash to sponsor things because of various changes. I won't go into political details because that's not the basis of this conversation. But it is very hard out there at the moment. Yeah. I'm sure you know that. Right, so do you have
thank you for the the report and the slides. I was slightly surprised to see the sort of political element at the start and how the different administrations impact this. And you don't really see that in any council report, so I was just a bit surprised to see that here. I don't know if there's a very particular reason for that, because we don't tend to see that elsewhere. But I think the frustrations of other people around the table, I share the same frustrations from the events and activities within Poulton, that rather than being that helpful sort of open arms embracing council, Baines is usually the sort of negative, problematic, wants to reap the benefit, financial benefit of cultural events and organisations, but tends to be the organisation that puts all of the fundamental blockers to most of those cultural events in place. And that could be as simple as road closures, it could be as simple as barriers, health and safety, it can loads of different things that Baines influence, has a strong influence on so many different events that we hold across the whole area. I suppose for me, this is very Bath focused, and there isn't enough here about what we can do in North East Somerset to improve things. And I think I would like to see, when we get the action plan, I suppose that will give us more of a guiding idea of how this strategy will develop cultural activities within North East Somerset in particular. At the moment, for me, I'm not really seeing that. There's other issues with, I know, our local library. We have to pay full business rates for our local library to keep it going as a parish council out of our precept. It's just things like that where Baines really shoots itself in the foot by not offering the support to so many different organisations. Same with sporting organisations, I might add, that have to pay full business rates. And, there are those simple things that can actually quite substantially help a lot of organisations in the area. At the moment, I don't have necessarily a massive problem with the strategy. I think it doesn't actually really go to the root causes of a lot of the issues, though, with cultural activities in Bath and North East Somerset.
So just to go through your points, just to reassure you, this is a completely apolitical document. I'm an officer, I'm not allowed to, express any political emphasis either way. The narrative expressed at the start is a descriptive narrative of what happens. I've only been with the council since November 21, so I'm not privy to the whys and wherefores. But there are a series of points on that journey there of where the council has been more favourable or less favourable to a public-facing cultural strategy that it's meant as a descriptive context, not anything other than that. Just to reassure you as well, it is vitally important that the strategy delivers for North East Somerset as well as Bath. There is a weight of cultural capital in Bath, so there's a sort of implicit emphasis to the council supporting and helping culture to continue to thrive there. But there will be a lot of time and effort and resource put into supporting cultural organisations and the cultural sector outside of Bath, and you could say the very centre of Bath as well. So making sure it's not just in that heritage core. There will be an emphasis on the Summer Valley. I know that now. There are independent cultural organisations establishing themselves in Radstock that the council already supports and wants to continue to support. And there has been a large amount of work, as you will be aware, on Summer Valley Rediscovered and the Active Way and those kind of things down there, all of which can form part of the cultural strategy. The Summer Valley will almost certainly be a priority growth area for WECA as well. And making sure that culture can benefit from combined authority funding to support the development of the Summer Valley is really important, and we don't want to miss that opportunity. It's not just the Summer Valley, we'll also be engaging with Midsummer Norton and Keynsham and like I said, the Chew Valley as well. So it will be there. It's not there at the moment with that specificity, but we will get there. What I'd say on the sort of barriers as you described them, part of the consultative period, it's really important that we hear those issues loud and clear. The council sometimes doesn't know what it doesn't know. So the way we deliver or facilitate events for third-party organisations is based on our statutory responsibilities, be it business rates or health and safety or security or anti-terrorism, all of those things. And that's what it's built on at the moment. But what that doesn't mean is there aren't ways for us to be more flexible or more helpful or more nuanced. But the whole part of developing this plan at the moment is to hear what the issues are from the sector and then work out what can the council meaningfully do about it. And for me, a big part of the action over the next 2 years will be working with those frontline colleagues in place management, licensing, etc., to see how we can make the process of engaging with the council to deliver culture as easy as possible, and that those frontline officers who are the ones, like, I'm not going to get rung up and said, oh, we want, it's going to be the people in place management, in licensing, other colleagues who will need to understand what they can and can't flex and who they need to ask and those kind of things. And those structures are to be developed. And a large amount of the work we can do over the next 2 years will be doing that. And we hear from the sector, that is one of the most meaningful things you can do, is make it easier. So take the point. Don't have a specific answer on those business rate things. It's not my area. I know sometimes we don't have that flex on business rates, but anything we can do, we'll consider. So.
Thank you, Chair. I don't really want to go over what everybody else has said, but I'm a ward councillor for Peacedown St John, largest village in Baines. Again, you touched on planning. We've got a possibility of another 250 houses coming. Again, it's part of the Somer Valley link. Again, so I just wanted to touch on libraries. I run the Peacedown Community Library. We had a grant in 2019 to start with. Money runs out very quickly. We have to rely on grants, which are getting harder and harder to get hold of, because everybody's trying to get hold of that same pot of money. You know, community libraries eventually will close because we won't be able to get those grants. How are you going to support that? The other thing is, we talked about fees and access for spaces for cultural events. Over the last 16 years, because it's not in the paperwork, I am a trustee of Peacedown Community Trust, which runs Party in the Park for Peacedown. Again, we have to pay fees. We are charged by the parish council that owns the land that we have the event on, but that land is owned by Baines. You know, is there any communication with town and parish councils to waiver those fees, so we don't have to incur those costs? So that's my question.
I don't know if we have that communication at the moment, but it fits into the kind of thing the council can do, which aren't direct grants to organisations. But yes, we'd be very keen to have conversations with colleagues in parish councils to see what the waiving of fees and charges would, what issues that would create. And as we all know, money's tight, so any money coming in is welcome. I think it has to be that active decision that says we are happy that we're not bringing in this amount related with fees associated with culture, but we're happy to not have that money and manage that within whichever budget it sits within, because we're getting the wider benefits of the cultural activity. So I'm not aware if we have those conversations at the moment, but it will be a key part of the actions going forward.
Thank you. Thank you for the report. So the document describes a vision for culture in Baines to be vibrant and inclusive. And I would argue that it's currently not, at least not in Baines, in Bath. So the major festivals will cater to certain middle-aged, well-off audience, and it's kind of dominated by a couple of organizations, which are doing fantastic work, but I wouldn't call it vibrant and inclusive. Yeah, I would say the Forest of Imagination has been a brilliant event, which was free. And my question to you would be, how can we include in the strategy how we can work towards the local offer being more vibrant and inclusive?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, and I think it comes back to probably doing a bit more work on the criteria by which Baines agrees to support cultural activity. We're not at that point, and it is likely that that will be one of the actions, that we're actually honing in on some of the specific metrics that we want to see from culture, both the activity that the council itself delivers, but also when we are in a position to support or endorse external cultural activity, that it is there. One we're considering at the moment is cultural engagement amongst communities related to their educational attainment, either people who are struggling in the attainment gap at the moment and increasing cultural engagement with those communities, or people who have not achieved a high level of education in their lives for whatever reason. That often correlates over to low cultural engagement. And so we need to do some more thinking on exactly what metrics we need to cover and what target audiences we want to approach, and that out of that will flow the commitment to inclusivity and vibrancy. The commitment's there. There's more work to do.
Thank you, Chair. I have no question.
Yes, you can.
Just my final comment, and as a Chew Valley resident, you'll be aware. Romans, very famous in Bath, but also famous around us. We've got famously the Hartford Hoard, which has now been renamed, annoyingly, the Chew Valley Hoard. But East Hartford Woods, very famous for its Romans. So, yep, you could always add, talking about not in this strategy, but going forward, incorporating our history of, the Mendip Hills and our Roman past. Just a suggestion.
Yeah.
We have the Stanton Drew stones as well, which is, people do travel long distances. You should all go.
Brilliant.
Have you? Okay, wonderful.
This is getting very good, but we're sort
It's
of...
irrelevant.
So let's go over to Grant.
Deborah touched upon the creative workspaces, and I suppose I'm slightly biased because I used to have an art studio at one of the workspaces in the centre of Bath at Black Chalk Art Studios. And I'm aware that Bath Artist Studios, just down the road from Black Chalk, is having to relocate, and I think at the moment they haven't actually quite confirmed where that relocation is going to be. So my question is, when we get problems, because all the time I remember when I was at Black Chalk, and the landlord would constantly be putting up the fees, and then that would come down to all of us individual artists in our individual studios and what have you. How can Baines support those organisations? One, obviously, because it's in the private sector, you're dealing with landlords and what have you. And I just wonder what mechanisms Baines could have or do have in place to support those organisations. And also, with such a large council estate, have we got any opportunity to start providing these sort of spaces? Because there are plenty of us creative people that are willing to rent small studio spaces. And I think at the time, and this was a few years back, it was £200 and something I was paying a month for my small studio space. So it's not like you wouldn't be generating good revenue from it, but the council doesn't seem to offer any of that, despite having quite an extensive estate of its own. So I'm just wondering what the avenues are for us to explore that, because I actually think there's a lot of potential there for revenue in our council estate that can support creativity and artists living in Bath and indeed North East Somerset.
Yeah, and I think, like I said, it's one of the key things we need to address. It's not necessarily a quick fix. Like if you're looking at repurposing spaces or building new ones or whatever. So for me, this 2-year period will be about laying the groundwork for a wider or the opportunity for a more determined drive at the issue around creative workspaces and like I keep saying, performance spaces and venues. And I think when I say that we've limited it to 2 years, I think it is for us to understand exactly the issues you've raised, like what opportunities are there in the council's commercial and corporate estate. There might be none, I don't know. We'd need to do that piece of work and it will take a little bit of time. And what are the levers the council has in the local plan or in our powers anyway to like you say, try and promote the development or retention of creative workspaces. Again, I don't know that at the moment, but those will be some key pieces of work to achieve over the next couple of years. And then whichever administration comes in, I would like to be in a position to then say to them, look, here are some opportunities as part of your policy agenda, should you wish to take them. And there will be some things we can do without cost, but for me it sits within, like you keep saying, it sits within the conversation around economic space and housing, and those are really big issues. So if we want to really tackle it, it will need the political buy-in that it sits alongside, or it sits in the mix with those things. And we need to do more work on the evidence base and the potential opportunities and solutions before we can make a real difference in that area, I think.
We've come to the end of your time. Thank you, Rob. I look forward to seeing you at the Cambridge Music Festival sometime over the weekend. I'll be there pretty much the whole time. And I hope you'll come back to us when you've completed the more practical aspects.
Very much would really welcome that. As I say, it will be in the autumn time. Don't have an exact date at the moment, but I'll work with Kerry and Councillor Roper and Sophie Broadfield to agree the most opportune time to come back.
Probably November, because September's pretty busy already.
Well, that's fine with me. That works fine. So, okay, I would be happy to.
Okay. Well, thank you for coming. You're a bit. The makeup of the panel is a little bit more North East Somerset than Bath. You may have noticed that. I don't know.
No, I think that's really good. I don't know. Officers always say this, but with a genuine commitment to. There's a lot of really, really brilliant stuff happening outside of Bath, and I'm personally really committed to seeing what we can do to support it. And like you say, it's tough out there. We always think it's tough in the council. It's tough if you're running if you're a freelancer in the creative sector, or you're running creative businesses, or it is really hard. So we can't do everything, but we can do some things. So we will get there eventually.
Good to hear. Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Right, okay, now I'd like to point out that we have 10 minutes left. Well, we haven't got 10 minutes left, but you know, I like to finish at 12 o'clock if possible. I think we may even finish slightly before 12 today. And I'm just saying that because looking at the agenda for September, just remember these wonderful days with the sun shining, we finish meetings on time, because it may be that in September that won't be the case. So we move on to the last item, which is the work plan. And for those of you who were here at the pre-meeting, you will know, and I'll say it again because not everybody was, that on the work plan we have the climate annual report, which is already there, but there's also 2 or 3 other things that we'd like to bring to it. The local plan is one that would be very opportune to bring to the September meeting. There's also the Bath waste plan for the Midland Road site and Loxborough Road, is that right? Yeah, and all that should be an opportune moment for that as well. And there's also linking to the annual climate report, there's also the adaptation response to the climate emergency, which will be available in September as well. So there will be 3 substantive items for September. There's only one on the papers, but I'm happy to take further topics which will be for November. It looks like we're going to see Rob back in November. I thought he took it quite well, really, and considering. And so, does anybody have any other potential topics?
Sorry, Chair. Just you've got you're going to discuss the annual report on the 25th of September, but isn't this coming to full council the week before?
That may well be true, because we've had this conversation.
No, the plan is come to scrutiny first, and then they're going to go to November Council.
Oh, so they've changed it, because on the forward plan, it is on the September forward plan.
Yeah, I think,
Okay.
speaking with the officers, the plan is to come to us first,
Okay.
take our input and then refine it ready for full council adoption.
And the other one, I didn't know whether it's the right place to discuss, is the new waste collection in the city centre, which is going to go from 6 p.m. to 8:30 for businesses. I don't know if that's something that might want to be discussed here as well. Yep. I'll be here in November then. I'm sure the leader of the council might be away on the 25th, and that's why they've moved it forward.
The Active Travel Master Plan. So that's come to this panel, but that was the Active Travel Master Plan. But the next step would be to prioritise the routes. So if you could ask about that, that would be great. Thank you.
I did have an email from Nick this week, so it is, yeah, they are starting to do it, so it's good. That's a good one. Thank you. And Chair, we have a vacancy on this. We do. Right, okay. So if tomorrow, depending on who by this evening is elected, maybe we could try and collar that person.
Oh, I see.
Just an idea. I'm not, enough has not allowed me at the count, but yeah, just tapping on the shoulder. Whoever that may be.
You're right, on a proportionality, it could be, yeah.